This is Antithesis, your underground academic radio where the focus is on you. For those that are in the thick of it today, we know what you are living through. And for those that chose or were forced onto a different path, we know what it costs. We're here to be your companion and to help you reorient your compass a bit, to help make sense of it all. Thanks for being here. The opinions expressed here are my own and do not reflect those of my employer or any entity professionally affiliated with me. Topics in these podcasts will be familiar to many, if not all, within the academic and scientific communities, within institutions, industries, and employers of all kinds. Some of these topics may be of a highly sensitive nature to certain listeners, particularly those that have experienced or are experiencing them, and could trigger some emotions that are upsetting or distressing. I've created this space to speak openly about these topics with the broader goal of helping individuals cope, adjust, and adapt constructively to the many challenges at hand. With that said, thank you for joining me. Antithesis, Episode 3, One Drop. Welcome, everyone. For anyone that is new or for those of you that tuned in to either or both of the prior two episodes, it's great to have you with us. To give a bit of background, my goal here is I want to provide content and with it some continuity as well that hits sometimes on obvious but hard-pressing topics. And these can and will occasionally, without a doubt, be very heavy. But that is a big part of why I'm building this series. There's a lot of stories to tell, but key things and themes, not just for academics present and past, but for everyone that demand some discussion. And as I've referred to in the past concerning the compass, right? Some reorientation in how we think and respond to a lot of things. And for those of you that tuned in to episode 2 entitled Failure, these concepts can also lead to a truly jam-packed session. So today, just some reflection on some broader philosophical points I want to make. These things that have seemed to align for a lot of folks recently from posts I've actually seen out on some of the social media networks. But first, for graduate and postdoctoral trainees that have tuned into episodes 1 and or 2, pressure from principal investigators and or your advisors, this can be real, especially when they expect or even demand specific outcomes and results from the science you are doing, or more accurately and bluntly, their science that you are doing, right? If this is the type of challenging situation you might be in, for lack of a better expression. There might be some faculty tuning into these, hopefully. And as a brief retrospective to the first couple episodes, I encourage you to go back and check them out if you haven't done so already. There are always two sides to an equation. And I think in terms of emphasizing from the perspective of trainees, younger students, postdocs, etc., you have to have your craft intact. And if it comes to an advisor that's questioning how you're doing things, you see, that's how we fall back to make sure you're doing your controls, you're demonstrating things clearly, you're communicating clearly. Of course, there can always be skepticism from mentors and advisors, but at the same time, right, we have to be accountable and we need to make sure from all sides that you're pursuing the real truth as to how a system works, whatever it is that you're researching, whatever you're studying. And again, I'll reiterate many, many times, it takes courage to turn around and tell an advisor or a principal investigator to say, the science is not going in the way we think it should be going or believe it should be going or hypothesize it should be going. And that last statement is the most accurate. It's not going in the direction we hypothesize it's going. And so I really want to underscore that for all of you in the audience. You really have to have your craft together. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have control over what you're doing it properly. And that's where you need to work together and find that community to find ways to get to the truth on the straightest line possible and avoid fear driving you to make some bad decisions. But when and what types of pressures are appropriate when it comes to driving science? I mean, there's always going to be pressure and it's going to be an endless circle. It's going to be going on and on, right? Submit a paper, get it reviewed, get it rejected, try to revise it, try to get it submitted again. Same thing with grants. These things are difficult, right? So knowing your craft, and this is not to sound harsh, but but for real, having blame laid on you for something not working, right? It's not unfair because you have to make sure you're demonstrating that it is working. But we emphasize so much, again, about craft and controls one more time. And that was heavy emphasis in episode 2. Now, these points are so important to consider. And of course, each individual, whether advisor or trainee or boss or employee, needs to be accountable for their actions and their respective responses to those actions. But I cannot express enough. Science outcomes and the truth of how systems, biological, chemical, and otherwise physical, are constructed and operate, they are not under the will of anyone. No one. And the more an individual wants to implore the idea that they are perfect in this manner, the more dangerous they become. This is much about what episodes 1 and 2 revolved around. And to repeat that theme, what I feel is the safest bet first for sanity and second for success. That is flexibility and where all the future outcomes take you. Now, this also means that if you are riding on a train of a long history of results and you've got a lot of funding driving your lab studies of a certain phenomenon and your successes in tackling it and gaining new understanding, and you scientists know what I'm talking about here, that introduces a brittleness to new ideas and it will start creeping in. I think it's important to constantly work to recalibrate oneself to these challenges, continue to be prepared for the fact that you want, as a scientist, to be prepared to continue to evolve in your thinking as you're contributing scientific journey, the things you're gaining on. It's very likely to branch a bit off the course you not only anticipated, but started to depend heavily upon publications and funding and all the other successes that come with it, even the accolades, right? But like anything else in life, be prepared to grow, to adjust, to revise, and remain hungry to continue discovering the truth and not working to sell something that you are depicting as the truth. But in all honesty, it's your truth. So for this whole concept of accolades, otherwise known as prizes, right? I'm going to touch on that in episode 4. So I'm hoping you all look forward to that one. That's a really important conversation. And what we mean by prizes and the Nobel Prizes were just awarded recently. As we encircle these themes comes today's episode entitled One Drop. That feeling of isolation, the feeling of smallness that comes from being what seems like one tiny drop in a whole ocean of different people, different topics, your locality, your microcosm, but within a whole global ecosystem or universal ecosystem. You don't need to be a graduate or postdoctoral trainee to feel this. So for everyone else listening in, so much of this will apply to you as well. One tiny little drop in an ocean of uncertainty. So often, particularly when applying to graduate schools, really not that different than looking to find employment for everyone else, there might not be a huge selection of choices where you fit or were even accepted. Or for those that chose to remain closer to home, you might find yourself at a great institution, but you might not be at what many folks would consider quote unquote the famous ones. And we're talking about the coast, right, everyone? Those are the ones that come to mind. But I'll let you in on a secret here early in this concept. I mean, a pretty commonly known secret, but it can be difficult for some to fathom, even at these places, right? The famous ones. The feelings of isolation can be and are amplified that much greater because of those environments. I'm telling you, for lack of a better term, those environments are amped. Expectations that are already escalated everywhere there can become even more excruciating. That's what the spotlight brings. But for every individual, no matter where you are left facing the heat of that spotlight alone. And in parallel to, we'll call them the top tier universities, I think these same emotions apply pretty darn well to what might be deemed top tier companies, right? So universities, companies, the big ones, the famous ones, the ones everybody wants to be at. The heat is on you, the spotlight's on you. But regardless, no matter where you are, these feelings all creep in. Casting aside any differences, right, between institutions, let's put that aside. No matter where you are, because every trainee is in that point, they're literally sitting in a pot of simmering stew. As new trainees in science, technology, engineering, they all start off. It can feel dizzying. Once this overall realization sets in of the expectations that fall on your shoulders, you apply to grad school, you get in, you're there, you're doing maybe rotations, you're trying to find your spot, and it is dizzying, but then suddenly, right, for those experienced, it just reinforces the stark reality. Eventually, it's gonna hit you. This is your show. And when the dust settles and it's all up to you, and you're thinking about a project, a topic, what is that research gonna do for you? What direction is this gonna lead? Then for most, if not many, the question is, who am I? Who am I in this process? One tiny little drop in a sea of competitors, disbelievers, and countering opinions. Thinking back on it in my experience, it really became a matter of scaling. And here I mean the scale of perspective of your local and global environments and how I processed it. Your lab, your department, then the university, but then what? Well, what is my primary research focus? Whom are my collaborators? Who are my competitors? And where do I fit into all this within the grand scheme of things, really? As you immerse yourself into your first months and longer, digging into the studies and research, again, there's so much going on. It can feel more like a matter of survival, just keeping your feet underneath you. But as time goes on, I think the right expressions could include avalanche or tidal wave of the enormity of what you're trying to do. Now, for the non-academics here, those of you that didn't go to grad school, maybe you didn't even go to college.
specifically those not familiar with what these PhD things are, right? Or generally what we're going to call the research focused doctorates. It means an individual should find something new as a result of their research efforts. So basically, expanding all of humanity's knowledge within a specific field. To get a PhD, specifically in a research field, that's what you have to do. As the newness wears off, if this wasn't already a part of a trainee's thinking, and particularly when the going gets tough, then the feeling can be crushing. One drop amidst a whole history and universe of past knowledge, and the needed purveyor of that new knowledge is you, that one tiny little drop. So, for the non scientific listeners, for the folks that did not or are not pursuing these other academic endeavors, it can be parallel wherever you are. Bring results, deliver, do it better, sometimes at whatever the cost, no matter what it means, what it takes. And this is where the phrase work-life balance crumbles into dust, right, everybody? As I've thought about and lived this issue and this feeling for years, it became clear very quickly that I needed to somehow ascribe value to myself in some form or fashion, just so I didn't feel so powerless at times. I ended up teaching a lot as a graduate student, and that took a lot of time, but it also meant I could gain value and improve my practices, maybe even better understand how I could have the greatest impact possible while keeping as efficient as possible. Should I ever dare to want to be a professor, I opted to take the opportunity to put into place some principles and practices. How could I assemble and execute on a system where I run a research lab while also teaching a large lecture course, if it ever came to it? And crazily enough, and with real relevance down the road to this podcast series, could I find a way to actually make it rewarding or even enjoyable? And what were the pros and cons of doing that? If I were to be successful doing that, how would everybody else look at me? And that'll be a conversation for another day. But this is where I want to emphasize to everyone listening, and it might seem obvious to many, but for scientists and science trainees, they need to hear it. You need to hear it on repeat. The more you grow and the better you get and the experience you gain, the tangibles and the intangibles increase your value. And this isn't just about gaining confidence in your abilities, but being your own best advocate and best steward for yourself. And while the whole argument of nice guys finish last or kindness is weakness is another entirely separate conversation and a frustrating one at that, it's another whole matter of perspective. It is immensely important to note here, the more people enjoy working with and want to work with you, the more advantages you will have. At that point, having that community is what's going to keep you afloat. This is a theme that I not only feel is so critical for scientists, and it feels like it's been lacking for so long, but funding agencies are moving this way. And folks, actually working together is starting to become a requirement. We have to really start to change our thinking about academia and the system and all of the research enterprise. But folks, as individuals, isn't it better to have friends and folks that can support you? You know, for me, the world, it feels like it's become a rougher place. Maybe this simply comes after having lived sufficient years on planet Earth. Maybe it's cyclic and we're working out a way back around again. Maybe it's a bit of both or more. I tend towards wanting to be thankful and show appreciation for folks that might find themselves doing work that could be thankless because their jobs are so much a part of our, let's call it our assumed infrastructure. And these are the ones often hearing more about problems when things go wrong and not so much when things go right for all of you in the workforce. But today it feels like our lives and society has evolved to where even producing a simple thank you or a compliment is often met with astonishment or even skepticism. I mean, when someone does their job and does it well, I'm even left evaluating that moment, the person, the situation offhand, and preparing myself that any appreciation and true thanks I share might end up not being received well at all in that moment because of so much negativity and our quote unquote differences that are being cropped up and dialed up so forcefully in our own microcosms to satisfy external agendas on the macrocosm level. I have made it a priority to appreciate and show gratitude for the simplest of things, as much if not more than I can, than feeling negative and cynical about all the things it seems I end up having to fix on my own as of late anyway. For the rest of you, I'm sure you feel the same. But even at the risk of facing someone's incredulity or doubt or some distrust in that moment, should someone have the mindset that I'm being patronizing, it's better to just say thank you. And sometimes you have to take a punch for doing that, but I wish we did that more for each other. One tiny drop in what can feel like an abyss of isolation. A connection on LinkedIn, Ben, hey Ben, posted the following, and I let him know I was going to share the gist of his message because it aligns so well with today's topic. So Ben, this one's for you, great timing. And this was a part of his post. Add value upward, inward, and outward every dang day. Make your boss's or client's life better, upward. Be open to daily learning, inward, and be wary if you've lost your curiosity. Continually offload and invest that learning to others, outward. During this one day changes almost nothing, right? During this one day changes almost nothing. But doing this consistently over time changes everything. And not just for those around you, but for you, right? For everyone, for that whole ecosystem. And it makes you think, network, aggregate. Don't just search to find the links and friends and networks, but work to make your community. Be receptive, be open to having those small impacts. And folks, those of you in the research field, how many papers can we publish in a handful of years? How many grants can we get? What can we achieve? What really is the enterprise we're on? Is it about training? And is it about those that come after us to make them better than us? Some more philosophies that I think we are going to need to talk about in this series. One drop. And you think about one drop and how small one drop is. And for some of you right now, how tiny you feel. One drop, you can dot that I. You can put the period at the end of a sentence, or maybe it's finishing off that question mark or exclamation point. You see, these things, they seem so insignificant, but they mean something. And I really mean that. You're a teaching assistant. You've got a class you're teaching. Try to show more patience. Give a bit of extra time. Show interest. It doesn't mean you have to give your life up. Now, that might also take practice for a lot of people that don't enjoy teaching, don't enjoy mentoring. But if you start to make a difference and show that example, the question is, how might that make you feel? How might that make you see things differently down the road? That one little drop of lubricant on a squeaky hinge, that can make a big difference. Maybe thinking back to being a kid. Some of you may recall, or maybe you are the moms out there, just using one tiny drop of food coloring to transform that frosting on a cake or cookies into something magical. Can we remember that? I can remember that being a kid. I mean, that small addition, changing the world for that moment with the birthday or whatever the dessert is, something really small, right? These things might sound so simple, but we all need to do better at feeling the positive impacts of those small things, and even the smallest things. They make an impact on you, and they make an impact on those around you. From the very bottom up, even a seed can start something amazing with just a single drop of water. And I can bet that people might listen to this and say, so cliche. But no, once you've lived this, and the fact of the matter is, whoever listens to this, collegiate, academic, worker, whatever you are, I think the concept of the feeling alone in our universe, feeling alone in our microverse, feeling alone in our locality, I think it's just truly how we, as that one little drop, can truly make that difference. And I think we have to reflect on that more and more in all the things we try to do, academia and beyond. And with that, thanks so much for joining me today. And I hope you look forward to our next episode that will be released in a week's time. No matter on which platform you heard today's episode, if you enjoyed it and you want to hear more, please subscribe, follow, like, and share, and set your notifications to let you know that the next fresh episode is ready for you to dig in. All of you, keep building your courage, hang in there, and keep your head up. We'll talk to you again soon. Continuing 30 years of experience with stories in and beyond the academic realm, Antithesis is a podcast that will take these perspectives and philosophies and pull them, along with you, the student, the researcher, the innovator, the educator, into the sunlight. Join us for some firsthand experiences, insights from inside and outside academia, and perspectives that are aimed at redefining the conventions of academia and your training, with the aim of helping you reorient your compass and strengthen you on your journey forward, or to recover and grow from those times past. We'd love to have you follow us and tune in weekly. If you have a topic you'd like discussed or a challenge you are facing you want to share, email us at allsystemsgo@gmail.com. That is ALLSYST3MSGO@gmail.com.